So it seems that the corrupted Astra Militarum forces allied to the Genestealer Cult are making light the tower and handing out some hit roll bonuses, though it comes with perhaps slightly sad news that Genestealer Cult armies can't take Brood Brothers outside of one limited detachment. Let's talk about the first previews for any of the codexes coming this weekend. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where this weekend seems like it's going to be quite a big one for Games Workshop. Two different codexes dropping, including the Genestealer Cults and the Sisters of Battle, plus the core gameplay updates to the main game of Warhammer 40k, the new Pariah Nexus mission deck, with new primary, secondary, and secretive missions. In today's preview, we got our first proper look at the Genestealer Cult Codex, though it is really focusing on Genestealer Cult of one given theme, basically the army to fill Brood Brothers, seemingly taking half and half a force of each. I've always found it quite a fun and interesting concept, so as someone who has both an army of Genestealer Cult and Imperial Guard, kind of fun to make some forces that have rather unusual combinations of units that you might not often see. So far for the rest of the Genestealer Cult Codex, we know that there's going to be the Index Detachment, the Biosanctic Brood Surge for melee, Outriders for fast attack, and some sort of Xeno congregation, a new Benefactors model with his rules, and a split data sheet for the Acolytes, both with and without the Hand Flamers, and that might come with a shake-up of the squad special rules. Today's all about the Brood Brother Auxilia detachment though. I don't know if they're getting a bit more focus because of the recently released Kill Team set that they got. It seems that that kill team is going to be just to represent Astra Militarum Brood Brothers, and doesn't get its own datasheet or anything despite some unusual war gear. I guess maybe running them as something like Deathcore Krieg would perhaps be the closest near fit in terms of special weapons and medics and things. Currently in game, the way that the rule works is that Genestealer Cult can fill a quarter of their points as certain Astra Militarum datasheets, with a fair few of them locked out. But these datasheets don't really get any sort of support from the actual Genestealer Cult Index attachment. You basically get their datasheet rules and nothing else, so for the most part act as guard -1. Though some units could certainly be helpful enough for the Genestealer Cult, things that maybe don't rely on too much synergy. This detachment looks like it's the one that's aimed to give those units a lot more purpose and synergy with the rest of the Genestealer Cult army, but unfortunately Games Workshop have done a bit of give and take with this one, as unfortunately it looks like this will now be the only place that we can run Brood Brothers, so no taking some random guard units along to support if you're running one of the rest like the Ascension Day 1 or the Biosanctic Brood Surge or the rest. For the release, the new Codex and the Battle Force box sets and things will all be going live at the weekend. If you were looking to pick any of it up, then the links below can help support Auspex Tactics a little bit, as well as get you a good discount versus Games Workshop, anything between 10 and 20% off. There's Element Games in the UK, Gap Games in Australia, Fenris Workshop in Canada, and Wargame Portal in the USA, and generally well worth it to save a bit of money on Games Workshop's big prices if you are picking stuff up. Plenty of other good alternatives exist for discount retailers, of course. For the battle forces, at the moment we have no idea exactly how much supply Games Workshop is going to have of these. A whole bunch of the rest of them have sold out really disappointingly quickly. In any case though, if you're trying to land any of them at a discount, I'll probably be ready at the time that they go live. These are the pre-order times for the stores in the video description: midnight in the USA and Canada, midday Eastern Time in Australia, and 10 AM here in the UK. I probably will be ready to fall back to the Games Workshop main web store though if you're absolutely sure that you're picking up one of the Battle Force box sets and all the discounters seem to have been given no supply, as Games Workshop tends to have done in plenty of the last ones. In any case, a big thanks to anyone deciding to support the channel with purchases through those. Let's get into Brood Brothers in the Genestealer Cult 10th edition Codex though, and according to their article it's confirmed that they've got the same restrictions as they had before, so things like no Commissars, no Tempestus Scions, no Ogrins or Ratlings, no Epic Heroes, Engineers, Preachers, or Aircraft. It certainly sounds like if you're using Brood Brother units before, you'll still be able to use them now, though I still would like to see the actual full list of those things, just to confirm that there's no other changes. I feel like out of that list, maybe having no aircraft is one of the more disappointing ones. I certainly remember a time when a few Genestealer Cult players were running a bunch of Vulture gunships for some flying support for the cult. That's quite a way past though. As mentioned, it's the Brood Brother Auxilia detachment that's now the only way that you can fill Genestealer Cult, and I feel like removing that from the other options is certainly going to annoy some people. There's probably going to be a bunch of people out there who maybe had a main core Genestealer Cult army, and then just had a few supporting units for the Astra Militarum, even if going heavy on them didn't tend to be enormously massively optimal anyway. I feel like for players who maybe had a large amount of Genestealer Cult and quite a small collection of guard models, this change really puts them in a bit of an annoying place, as they might well not have enough Imperial Guard models to really justify fielding this detachment, and also if they want to try out the other detachments in the Codex, if one of them happens to be a lot more interesting or powerful, then they won't be able to use those guard models at all outside of proxying. Obviously, you can do whatever your opponent's happy with in more casual games, though I think it's kind of annoying to make that change in quite a big one that's going to impact people's armies. In any case, the change for the new Brood Brothers detachment is basically to try and make a sort of half-half split between Astra Militarum and Genestealer Cult units. In this one, you can now take half your force as Astra Militarum rather than a quarter, so you could go very heavy on them if you really wanted to. Though given that they don't get their Codex core rule or the detachment rules, these units will still kind of function as guard units but not quite as good. They won't get orders and voice of command due to that needing the Astra Militarum to be your core faction. They won't get born soldiers from the combined regiment, the lethal hits if static, so that means that artillery takes a hit. And you won't be able to use any of the stratagems from the combined regiment, things like fields of fire or reinforcements. Obviously, it's not all bad news though, and this detachment does aim to add a few fun benefits that allow the guards to support the cult a bit better. It seems the core rule for the Brood Brother Auxilia is the integrated tactics rule, and basically it boils down to Astra Militarum units buffing the shooting of certain Genestealer Cult units, marking enemy targets for a +1 to hit in the shooting phase. The way it's triggered is that a guard unit within 18 inches that shoots one enemy unit and solely that enemy unit gets to activate that rule, perhaps laying down a bit of crossfire and harking back to the 8th and 9th edition versions of that rule. And if they do so, then any Genestealer Cult units that get to shoot in that same shooting phase will be +1 to hit against that target, so it does mean that you maybe could mark one unit with one guard unit and then have a whole ton of Genestealer Cult shooting all buffed by that. As it goes, I wouldn't say it's the absolute strongest detachment rule in the world. It definitely does add some strength, though bear in mind it's probably only going to be functioning for say something like a quarter of your army or so in any one turn. It doesn't actually boost the guard shooting whatsoever. It does mean that you might have positioning requirements like guard units winding up, exposing themselves or going closer than they might like to, and maybe also shooting at something that's not really all that optimal just to trigger this buff. Having said that though, +1 to hit is definitely good for certain Genestealer Cult attacks. If you coordinate it with seismic cannons hitting on a 5+, then going to hit on a 4 is a whole world better. And the same applies to bombing runs from Acolyte demo charges, though I guess they might not be as easy to deliver given that they wouldn't have access to that one command point drop just outside of 3 inches stratagem. This would basically be instead of the damage boost that you get coming out of reserves though. So you wouldn't get the innate ignores cover and sustained hits one that you get from that currently, so you would be taking away that damage boost, which is fairly easy to trigger in itself. Overall, just in isolation of any stratagems and things, it feels like it incentivizes small amounts of guard units pushing forward. Maybe small cheap units like Scout Sentinels or 10 strong guard squads in Chimeras could be quite good choices to lay this down. I feel like if you had a few of those in the vanguard of your army scrapping over objectives, then you're probably going to be able to tag things to mark with that, and then back that up with some good Genestealer Cult shooting, maybe a whole bunch of seismic cannon neophytes and things, or even some rock grinders with some heavier weapons perhaps. Otherwise, we've been previewed a trio of other stratagems. First up, we have 1 CP for In the Shadow of Iron. I say this one's probably one of the better ones. One command point to basically rescue a cold ambush marker that the opponent's got too close to. When the enemy ends one of their moves within 9 inches of it, you basically get to take that cold ambush token and set it up anywhere that's wholly within 6 inches of one Astra Militarum vehicle unit anywhere on the board. And it does seem quite nice as a get out of jail free card and potentially giving you the option to return a unit to the board, a unit that you might have otherwise lost if the marker was taken out. It could also be a chance to deploy the marker a bit more aggressively as well, maybe somewhere a bit less peripheral to the army, particularly if that move was one of the last ones that your opponent had to do in their movement phase and you know that they can't reach it in certain places. And also it could just disincentivize the entire thing where the enemy moves to try and take out those cold ambush tokens. They might just not really see it as worth the positioning downside if they know that you can just defend it for one command point. In general, that one feels like it rewards having at least some Brood Brother vehicles present, and you could do this with things like Sentinels as well. I guess maybe it might be worth having one vehicle somewhere towards the home field a little bit safer, maybe something like some artillery, or even something super cheap like a Cyclops demolition vehicle. Next up is an interesting but pricey one called Acceptable Losses. This one's 2 command points, and he nominates one Astra Militarum unit from your army. That unit is allowed to shoot one enemy unit that's in range of Genestealer Cult units in engagement range. So basically fire into combat and ignore their cultist brothers that are trying to take them down with their melee weapons. As a punishment for firing dangerously, you roll a dice after you've done so, and on a 5+, your engaged Genestealer Cult unit takes d3+1 mortal wounds. I feel like this one could have been a bit more of an overall usable one for 1 CP. At 2 CP though, I think you're going to have to save it for when it's going to be absolutely game changing. Most of the time it's just going to be best to save those command points and just either fall back the unit or choose to fire at something different. Sometimes though, I think it could be a really big deal. Probably the biggest thing would be if your unit's locked up by a fragile enemy unit that you could outright kill. If you were just able to finish off the last few models in that unit, then your Genestealer Cult unit could now be free to shoot or charge something else, and that could be really quite massive. Otherwise, I guess if you had a big tough squad of aberrants, or maybe a whole load of fighty pure strains in melee, and you really wanted their melee damage in the fight phase, but you also did need to support them and contribute some more heavy firepower to take down their targets, then I guess this could allow you to do so. Though I feel like for 2 command points, you're basically only ever going to use this when you can really justify the spend, and even if all the above are true, you still need a guard unit that can actually shoot that powerfully, strong enough to be able to contribute meaningful damage and maybe threaten to wipe out that said unit. Next up for 1 command point, there's Regimental Reinforcements. This one allows 1 Astra Militarum infantry unit to get put into Cult Ambush on a 3+, and then you deploy a new token on the board as you normally would. You use it when the infantry unit's just been destroyed, and you can't use it on artillery or character units. This one basically feels like it's the Genestealer Cult sort of version of the Astra Militarum 2 command point reinforcement stratagem, though with some pros and cons. The big positive is that you can only use it for 1 CP, it doesn't cost 2, though it does have the downsides of not being guaranteed. A 3+ is going to be a really big swing between whether or not the unit gets put into Cold Ambush or just gets removed from the board anyway. And also the slight disadvantage with the Cold Ambush markers in that you need to put them somewhere safe, somewhere the enemy isn't just going to be able to move towards the token and take it away. It's also not quite as free as the targets as the guard reinforcement one. That one can be used on things like the field ordnance batteries, sentinels, and rough riders and things. This one's just infantry. I guess the best target usually going to be big, strong 20-man squads of things with some objective control. Maybe things like Kriegsmen, full-on infantry squads, or Kaschan jungle fighters. It'll need to be something valuable enough that a 1 command point to have a 2/3 chance to have them saved will be worth it. Overall, I feel like this one's a reasonable enough one, good enough to get used if you take the targets that it's worth using on. Overall, I feel like the detachment's interesting, but might depend a bit as to what it's competing with. It might be that, as with other index detachments, they get nerfed a bit going into the Codex to try and bring them in line with the new Codex detachments coming out. If that doesn't happen and the core index Ascension Day detachment is reprinted fairly similar to what it is now, I feel like that one's probably going to be the more tempting one still, just having really powerful options like taking units on and off the board, some really cool big damage boosts, and hiding units from being shot. It just maybe doesn't feel like there's going to be enormous amounts of big strength here, though I think that some of the options are interesting and usable. The core rule does feel like it's predictable enough to trigger to hand out some big focused fire Genestealer Cult shooting damage with things like the seismic cannons. And I would say that literally all of those detachments are usable. The Regimental Reinforcements one and In Shadow of Iron I both think could be quite consistent uses, but maybe don't really feel quite as proactive as some options out there, given that they're sort of reliant on your units getting destroyed for them to take effect. Hopefully in the other 3 that we haven't seen yet for the detachment, we might get some other interesting stuff. I'm kind of curious to see what the enhancements for this detachment wind up being as well. Will be fun to see if they can go on the Astra Militarum units this time round, or if it's still sticking to the Genestealer Cults. Otherwise though, I suspect that the focus is still going to be on the actual Genestealer Cult units for the most part, even if the Guard are going to be a big part of the army. In terms of efficient damage dealers, most of the Guard units I don't think are likely to be standout great here. They will just be lacking quite a lot of support with no orders and no born soldiers, just meaning their damage isn't super efficient, so you might well get best value out of things like cheap scouty units that mainly get value from their durability, things like Kaschan jungle fighters, chimeras, perhaps some armoured sentinels or something. Or maybe roles that the Genestealer Cult don't have access to in great numbers, things like a bit of indirect fire or long-range anti-tank perhaps. Hopefully it winds up being usable, though unless anything changes with the index detachment, I kind of feel that unless there's any other big stuff out of the stuff they haven't shown us for this one, it might be a little underpowered versus the rest, probably not likely to be the strongest one out of the Codex. That might be by design, of course. Maybe they don't want the best guard army out there to be the one that plays as Genestealer Cult allies, I suppose. Otherwise, though, just a shame that Brood Brothers are going to be locked to one detachment now. I think the old system worked pretty well. Let me know what you think in the comments of that one, though. In any case, I'm certainly looking forward to checking out the rest of the rules in Codex Genestealer Cults. I'll certainly be making a review of the Codex as soon as I can on the channel. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that, and I'll certainly cover any other leaks or news rumours that we get before. I'm curious to see what the 10th edition Codex has in store for the Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor. Pre-orders are going live on Saturday the 8th, and feel free to check out the channel's discount links if you want to pick some things up at a discount and support Auspex Tactics when you do. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all the content coming. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.